What's Annie?
The shifter. It's Annie.
What?
She says, "If don't look at me, just look forward."
Welcome to Decoding TV's coverage of The Boys Season 4. I'm David Chen here with Patrick Klepek. I should point out that apparently this episode was originally entitled Assassination Run. It was then renamed to Season 4 Finale. Terrible title. Curious if they're going to change it back or how that's going to work out. And also, apparently there was a disclaimer that was placed at the top of the show that said the following: viewer discretion advised. This episode contains scenes of fictional political violence. Any similarities to recent events are completely coincidental and unintentional. Prime Video, Amazon, MGM Studios, Sony Pictures Television, and the producers of The Boys oppose, in the strongest terms, real-world violence of any kind, end quote. Now, Patrick Klepek, I will say I did not see that disclaimer. I have heard other people did see it. I'm curious, did you see the disclaimer? Do you remember seeing it?
I remember reading about it. I can't tell you with full confidence that I saw it when I actually
I was looking out for it. I didn't see it, but I heard other people saw the disclaimer when they watched it. So and anyway, this was shared on social media that they would be doing this. So obviously they could not have predicted that there would be a real life assassination attempt on a presidential candidate of the United States literally the week before this aired. And that's why they felt they had to do something. I will just say, anecdotally, it does not feel like there's been any backlash to this at all. I don't think anyone's said, like, how dare the boys do this? I think anyone who's still paying attention to the boys probably understands their whole deal. There has been a lot of backlash to the finale, separately. To the season, separate than that, but like not about that specific plot point. So, Patrick Klepek, what were your overall thoughts on this season of The Boys?
Really disappointing. I think a poor season overall. I was hoping for a lot more. I think part of what disappoints me the most is when we talked about this season ahead of time. It's like, oh, maybe because they've announced the final season in advance, there's a chance that this is going to be just kind of spinning plates. Like, we're just going to kind of keep everything in a status quo because we can't make any actual decisions until that final season. I don't think that might be true. I think that could be leveraged as a criticism of this season, but it's in a sea of other problems, like whether it's the multiple times this show thinks sexual assault is just super funny if it happens to a guy, like that's bad. Just not enough storytelling, interesting stories for the vast majority of the characters. This was a season I watched because I've watched the previous ones and I've made it this far. I want to see how it ends. And I'm just desperately hoping they've just been keeping ammunition in the chamber for the stories they want to tell in the finale. By the time I got to the end of this season, I did not really have the confidence that they're going to be able to stick any meaningful landing by the end.
Wow. That's pretty harsh, Patrick Klepek. I think you're a little harsher on this than me. I think this
I like
season...
the finale. I'll say the finale, like I did like, but the season as a whole, I found to be pretty damn disappointing.
I'm sorry to hear that. I also thought the finale was pretty solid. I did not have quite a negative a view of the season as you do. I think the season is wildly uneven, right? Like basically what they did is they have a bunch of the boys go on their own little mini journeys and adventures and pilgrimages. And it's up to you as to how successful those are, right? Like, maybe we can talk about like some of the different adventures they went on and whether any of them resonated with you. I would say structurally it feels flawed because like there's this extremely interesting storyline of Victoria Newman and the president being elected and like what's going on with Homelander and all that stuff. And so it felt like anytime we were not dealing with that, it was like, when are we going to get back to that stuff? All the boys had their own little adventures. It felt like kind of a distraction from like the main storyline this season. And then I would say like overall, I think the main storyline delivered in terms of like getting to an interesting place. But yeah, it does feel like there was a lot of wheel spinning this season. I will also say one other thing that I liked about the season, which is The Boys continues to shock. Like every episode, there was some shocking, disgusting thing that happened. And again, sometimes it felt a little bit edgelordy, and sometimes it felt like, as you said, they're making light of sexual assault against males. And in interviews, they've explicitly said that's what they're doing. You know, they're doing it because it's funny. You know, it's like, okay,
right.
like, don't love it. don't love it, you know. So, but that said, like, there's few shows that have the ability to shock, and consistently shock and push the envelope. And I appreciate that a show like this is doing it, even if the rest of the storytelling is not quite as cohesive or satisfying as I think we would like. So overall, I think it's really mixed bag of a season. I would not say it was a good season of the show, but the finale is essentially the Avengers Infinity War for the boys, right? It is a super downer episode that leaves everyone in a terrible situation. And it's going to be it's a massive cliffhanger that is going to take 2 years to resolve. We're not going to get new episodes until at earliest late 2025, probably 2026. So going to be a while until this is resolved. Anyway, those are overall thoughts on The Boys season 4. Let's talk about a few things that happened this season. Butcher tells the boys about a virus that kills the supes, the creation of which was the main plot of the spin-off series Gen V. When the remaining sample of the virus is destroyed, they kidnap and maim the scientist responsible, Dr. Samir Shah, and force him to create another copy. But Samir Shah reveals while the virus can kill Homelander, it could also kill all the supes around the world. And so this is going to be a big topic of whether or not they are able to deploy the virus. I'm just going to say, Patrick, I thought the Gen V tie-ins were kind of well done. Like, you don't need to have watched Gen V to understand what's going on in this season, but if you did, it's like, oh, I have a bunch of context for these characters, this virus that I don't have, right?
It's backstory as opposed to, as we've talked about multiple times, as we've covered a lot of the different Marvel stuff, where you feel like, you should watch Gen V. It's a much that first season is way stronger than any of the storytelling that happened throughout this season.
Agreed.
So I highly recommend it.
It's shockingly it's way better than The Boys, in my opinion.
Would even if you look at The Boys and go, that's like a really long commitment, just watch Gen V. You get a flavor of like the storytelling, right, like the violence of The Boys, and it's, at least to this point is only one season. I know they're in production on the second one, but I'm with you. I thought rather than a lot of Marvel stuff where it feels like homework, like I don't understand what happened and I feel dumb because I didn't watch X, Y, or Z show or watch X, Y, or Z film. Here, like, it's all perfectly contextualized in the show. You get the basic information, but it's so much more interesting if you know what happened in Gen V, which really, like, let's see if they're able to maintain that as they continue, or to extent they expand the universe. Now that we know it's a final season, I don't know how far that keeps going, but in terms of the balance they've got right now, I felt like it was super cool having watched it, but I'm sure that worked just fine for anybody that didn't actually pick up with Gen V.
It didn't feel essential.
No.
And that's actually a feature, not a bug, in my opinion. Anyway.
Yes, agreed.
Meanwhile, the boys uncover a plot to assassinate the president of the United States with a shapeshifter impersonating someone. Could be anyone. Homelander and Victoria Newman, the vice president-elect, convince a bunch of political elites that they will be better leaders than President Singer. And Homelander fires Sister Sage for hiding from him the fact that she knew that A-Train is a mole. A-Train flees the country with his family and is still at large at the end of the season. So those are a few things that happen. And we're going to cover where we leave off with each of the characters. Now, I want to say, actually, I was going to say something about Sage, but we'll get to her in a bit. So Annie has been replaced with the shapeshifter. And Annie's shapeshifter is supposed to assassinate the president. She sexually assaults Huey, proposes marriage to him, and then tries to kill the president. All in a week's work for a shapeshifter. Real Annie is able to rip off her handcuffs, somehow find the president of the United States bunker, and save the day, killing the shapeshifter. Later, she confronts Huey about sleeping with someone who looks exactly like her. All right. Lots going on here. I want to first start by giving a huge shout out to Erin Moriarty, who plays Starlight. It's amazing what these actors on The Boys can do when you ask them to actually... When you give them a challenge. When you give them a challenge, which, like, most of the time they don't, I think. But there's this scene where Erin Moriarty, or Starlight, is interacting with a shapeshifter version of herself. And it is incredible. It's like the highlight of the season, in my opinion, where
Agreed.
You are convinced that it's like two separate people talking to each other, even though it's really just one actress playing both of them. And the shapeshifter is so evil, like such an evil character. Like, they're able to not only absorb your appearance, but also absorb your thoughts, which is really creepy and upsetting. And I was just like, wow. Like, I literally did not know Aaron Moriarty was capable of that. And I'm not saying this to no shade to Aaron Moriarty. It's just like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, so much was asked of her, and she stepped up to the plate and delivered. Incredible scene, I thought. So anyway, just wanted to shout that out. Patrick, sounds like you agree with me on that one, right?
No, yeah, I mean, and they've tried multiple times throughout the season. Who's the other villain in the seven? Firecracker, right? Like who's sort of like the like Fox News hosty, like Alex Jones sort of surrogate in this world. And they've tried at multiple times in this season to give her like a mirror, like a reflection, like who are you? Like who is the real Starlight? Who is the real Annie? And it didn't work with me with Firecracker. Like none of that stuff really landed, and they didn't spend enough time with it to really feel meaningful. And here, finally, like just confronting a version of herself,
Yeah.
I like they landed this. I don't know if I call it an arc because this point I thought landed really well. Was a fantastic showcase for the actor, and it's like I could have watched this be an arc for multiple episodes. Like, it was like, hey, holy shit! Like you landed on something here. Unfortunately, the season's about dead to end. Like, not only was like they found something really fascinating and interesting for the character and the actor, but like the shapeshifter as a villain for the show.
Yes,
it was, as you pointed out, the show. Its humor and its violence can shift into edgelordy territory at times. But their conceit on how the shapeshifter works is The Boys at its best, which is, all right, so how are shapeshifters represented in like most other comics, sci-fi? Like they just sort of do a visual transition or a camera cutaway and then there's somebody else. Here, you rip the flesh off you in chunks as you work your way to what you want to become.
Right.
I'm fascinated that I haven't seen it before because it makes a ton of sense as like a way to represent that. And maybe it has, but not certainly to this degree. And all that stuff works so well for me that I think it's part of why I'm so harsh on the rest of the season. It's like there was a bunch of good ideas here. I just don't like the story that was told for the vast majority of the season itself.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of chatter online, negativity about like Annie's reaction when she finds out that Huey's been sleeping with a shapeshifter. It's like, dude, Huey has just been sexually assaulted by this, character. Maybe go a little easy. Could he have like known? Like I've seen a lot of like reaction to that degree, and I thought it was okay. Like the sexual assault against Huey all season has not been sensitively portrayed. That is a fact, in my opinion. And when Eric Kripke, the showrunner, is interviewed, he's like, "We did it because it was funny. It's just funny to have Huey be violated." I think is kind of the sense I get. Putting that aside, which is like mildly upsetting, in my opinion. Putting that aside, that Huey has gotten a raw deal this season. I thought it was okay. I can understand why Annie would feel betrayed, and they do kind of reconcile relatively quickly. But it was a kind of notable moment that I wanted to point out.
My problem there is less about Annie than it is Huey and how Huey was written and portrayed and reacted, and the show reacts to certain events. But like Annie having extremely complicated or like initially sort of kind of like emotionally violent feelings. I don't think that's not like that's not the top of my problems with how the Huey stuff has been portrayed throughout the season.
So in the final episode of the season, Victoria Newman is exposed as a supe live on air by Homelander and calls on Huey to protect her and her daughter in exchange for helping to take down Homelander. So anyway, there's also a meeting between Mallory and Ryan, who visit Butcher. And Mallory tries to convince Ryan to turn against Homelander. Ryan refuses, killing Mallory and fleeing. This causes Butcher to realize he cannot go easy on his own son, and that all supes must be exterminated. There was this subplot that was revealed that like this guy, Joe Kessler, was in Butcher's brain the whole time. Any thoughts on that, Patrick Klepek?
Not look, I like all the actors involved. Like those scenes were fun, but if there was any storyline that feels like so much is being left for the final season so that the character can accomplish essentially nothing this season, like it was Butcher. Like it just like he's passing out. There's a weird thing on his head. Are we explaining his powers? Why is he sick? Why is he healthy now? Like just none of that is really, I mean, I guess you can read into it like the parasite, whatever is within him, wanted him to essentially like exterminate Supes. And like once he makes that conscious decision to do that, he's suddenly healthy and able and to get up again. I suppose that's a reading that tracks with the events we see throughout the show, but Butcher is like an interesting character that I've enjoyed watching this man walk between worlds of violence while also having this really emotional soft spot for this woman and Ryan. And I don't know, just so much of that gets jettisoned this season in favor of like, what's going on with his powers and why he's dying. And I don't know. It just, again, like it's one of those storylines that I guess if paired as a part one, maybe it'll feel more satisfying. But as a singular season, it didn't do a lot for me.
There's a lot of rubber banding with Butcher's health
Yeah.
condition this season. Like he ends last season being like, "You have months to live," so it's like, "Oh wow, he's in the decline." And then, oh, actually, he's good. He's actually well enough to fight and do stuff. And then in this in literally the finale, he's like calling Hugh. He's like, "Yeah, go to that steakhouse for me, man. Will you like, I'm dying here. I'm not."
It was a good moment. I liked that.
Yeah, and then it's like, oh, and then later he's on the mend again, and I understand, like presumably part of it is like if he's listening to it's basically he kind of becomes like Venom, right? Like he has this kind of like symbiote, and if he's listening to the symbiote, he's like more powerful. I get it, but it's it doesn't necessarily make for like the most compelling arc when it comes to like trying to follow that character's sort of emotional journey. I will say somebody pointed out to me that do you remember BoJack Horseman?
Mm-hmm. Love
you
that
ever
show.
watch that show? Love that show. Do you remember there was a fake show within the show called Filbert?
Yes.
Which is a like hard. It's kind of a parody of True Detective, and essentially in that show, the main detective character has has a like friend who turns out to be a ghost. It's basically the same plot as what Butcher had happened this season. And Filbert on BoJack Horseman was created to lampoon shows like this. So like we were already like making fun of like the Butcher style arc like 5 years ago. It's essentially kind of like a bit of a cliche that you have this noir-ish type character who has like an imaginary ghost friend that he's racked by guilt over. So not the greatest arc, I think.
Well, not only that, but the sense that he's not really there is portrayed eventually in the show as like a big reveal, like right, like nobody else can see it. It's like, show, I'm so far ahead of you. Like that was
Yeah.
like the only time it's possibly up for grabs is right in the beginning when they have coffee,
right?
And it's like, oh, okay, like I guess they could kind of come like. That's the only time the show truly portrays that as something that could be plausibly happening in reality. We detach from that very quickly. And so the show treating it as a big, like you didn't, this isn't the Sixth Sense. Like you didn't put in the work to make this plausible. And so I think that's a huge part of.
I agree. Like I think many of us saw it coming before it was actually revealed. I will say the way they did it was kind of cool, where they have Joe Kessler talking to his ghost wife. Like that was kind of a cool moment. And then they show the Tyler Durden-esque flashbacks. That was nice, but like we all knew that was what the deal was. So anyway, Butcher shows up at a meeting between Victoria Newman and the boys and kills Victoria and takes the virus. Victoria's daughter is then sent to Red River, where her mother was raised. Very sad ending for that character. Now, this comes after Huey has given the speech of like, hey, we've been murdering people left and right. Maybe we should try forgiveness and working together and not murdering people. It's basically the boys' equivalent of when they go low, we go high. Right? When they go low, we go high. And everyone's like, yeah, you know what? Maybe we should do that. And there is this nice moment when Butcher shows up and Huey says, if you've ever I've never asked you to trust me, but trust me for this one thing. And then Butcher screws up the plan and kills Victoria Newman. You know, I saw a lot of backlash to this online. Victoria Newman getting killed. I don't know how to feel about it because, on the one hand, it was a shocking death. Like, Victoria Newman is an awesome character.
Yep.
Like, every time I saw Victoria Newman, I was obviously played by Claudia Dumit, like, talented actress, interesting character, curious where that character's going, really cool powers, very just compelling screen presence. I'm like, oh, like
Mhm.
I just like Victoria Newman as a character. And so for her to just be slaughtered like so unceremoniously like this, uh, I understand why some people feel like the show did that character a disservice. At the same time, I don't know how to feel about it. I mean, like, it was shocking, and the show is largely about shocking you, and so it accomplished that. Patrick Klepek, how did you feel when Victoria Newman got ripped in half and her entrails rained down upon Huey in this episode?
Well, I don't have a problem sort of like plot wise where it ends up, but it strained credibility with me because part of what makes Victoria Newman such an interesting character is not only how they're played, but also just how dangerous they are.
Mhm.
They can just look at you and your head is exploding like you're in the movie Scanners. And so what? A couple of gross tentacles get around her and she can't just
He
blow everyone's head up in the
right.
room?
He covered her eyes, you know, so I think maybe she needs eyes to look at things, and maybe he's
Okay.
got like all this tentacle blood in him that can't explode, you know? I don't
I
know.
mean, I'm with you. Like, in the eventual, the boys novelization
Yeah.
adaptation of the television show adapting the
Yeah.
comics, maybe there's an explanation, but it's it's one of those moments that is shocking in the actual moment you're in, but once you're past it, you're kind of scratching your head. And the boys, at its best, it doesn't make you feel that way. It's shocking, and also you're like, yeah, that was like, wow, that was pretty interesting or shocking or violent, and it doesn't. I don't know. It doesn't feel like it's intellectually dishonest, and that part just didn't. It didn't land for me. And
Yeah.
also, I guess I have to
Just
say,
because she's been built up as such a powerful
such a
character.
powerful character,
Right.
and for her to go out like a punk does
Yeah.
not line up with that character. And just as a storytelling device, I wanted that character around for the final season. Like,
Yeah.
she adds a lot of tension. She has a great dynamic with like multiple characters in the show.
She has awesome chemistry with Huey because they are a real life couple, you know?
Yes, and like
You
taking that.
you can tell, like, they have way more
Yes.
chemistry together than Huey and Starlight, in my opinion, you know?
Yes, totally agreed. And just taking her off the. I don't have a problem with her taking off the board, especially as we head towards a finale. But taking her off the board now in this way, the way it was done, that felt. It didn't feel like it lived up to what the show had built up with that character, and so that's my problem, way more so than actually taking her out of the story.
Well, it turns out Sage was smart after all, because everything went according to her plan. Singer is arrested because there's video released of him admitting that he plotted to kill Victoria Newman. Now, who took that video and how it got out? You know, who knows? Yada yada yada. Like, unclear, but who knows? And soup-friendly Steve Calhoun, the Speaker of the House, becomes the new president of the United States, declaring martial law, putting Homelander essentially in charge of all law enforcement in the country. So, Patrick Klepek, Sister Sage, I'll say what I liked and what I don't like about this character.
Okay,
What I like is,
which list is longer?
well, I mean, what I like is that she admits, hey, why did you? Homelander asks, like, why did you do all this? And she says, because I wanted to see if I could. And if you're that
Mhm.
smart, if you're that like godlike, you're bored. You're bored, and you're just like, hey, I want to see if I can stage a coup of the United States. Can I do it? Oh, good. My intellectual curiosity has been satisfied, and that's basically all I'm living for these days, anyway. Right.
Mhm.
So that's like, I like, that's a very chilling idea of,
On the page,
yeah.
on paper, you like that idea. I agree.
Well, I think also like the way, the way she says it. I believe her when she says it. All that stuff. So that's the motivation of why she does everything. I liked a lot.
Mhm.
The way the characters' plans happen, I am not a huge fan of, and the problem is when you have a character who is the smartest character in the world, you have two choices for how that character's decision can play out. Number one, they make mistakes to generate tension. And then it's like, well, are they really that smart? Or number two, they don't make any mistakes. And then it turns out the whole thing was their plan all along, right? And both paths are unsatisfying for different reasons, right? Like one is, oh, well, she's not really that smart. And the other is, oh, she was smart, but like she didn't tell us the plan. And it's like a heist movie where it's revealed it was all part of the plan all along. So it's like, just don't write a character who's the smartest person in the world. Like, unless it's like a Dr. Manhattan, like all powerful type, where like that's kind of the point, you know, just don't write a smartest character in the world, because like it is deathly for dramatic stakes, in my opinion. Patrick Klepek, am I wrong?
No, I worried about this when we talked about the opening couple episodes of the show, is that it felt like it was a character smarter than the show itself, like to this point. And my worry was they're going to exit her stage left and then have her come in at the end and be like, well, look,
It was all part of the plan.
all part of the plan. And, you know, if you can't come up with a way of portraying intelligence in on screen, whether we're talking just like a hyper intelligent character, like a like not necessarily even a superhero level, but just displaying intelligence is difficult on screen. Like it's so much easier in the written form because you can give interiority to a character that you cannot do, that comes across as exposition or very boring when you're doing television and movies, or at least there's a high degree of difficulty to make it interesting. And I think in The Boys, they just chose, well, we just simply won't even try. And they spend a bunch of the show kind of making her look like inept, uninteresting. Like the best they do, which is I think a scene you and I both liked, was like her introduction and her exit from this season are the best moments that this character has. And everything in between, which they write off as just, well, she did this all on purpose. It was all part of the plan. But it makes for like a very boring character to watch.
Agreed.
And that's ultimately was my problem, was they never landed on an interesting way on screen when she's not privately plotting to portray who she is and what she was doing. Was all the stuff with the Deep something she actually want? Like, does she actually want to have sex with the Deep? Like, does she actually need to do the stuff where she like memory holes herself? Like, or is that also part of it? Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know where her actions begin and the plan ends. And even if it's chilling and it's interesting on the book ends of it, very little about it worked out for me in the middle, and makes for just a pretty disappointing character overall. And I think it's to your point, why broadly it's kind of just best to avoid characters like this in general.
Right. I will say that was a very funny moment when she's kind of like leaving and the Deep it's revealed that she's been sleeping with Black Noir and the Deep.
Oh, that was really
and the Deep says, wait, she's been giving herself a lobotomy and sleeping with you too? And he's like, lobotomy?
I mean, I actually, the show doesn't spend a lot of time with this, but like, you know, if you read into what that's sort of saying about the character, is like, she does a coup because she's bored, and the only way to take pleasure in the simple things in life is to make herself dumber, and the only way to do that is to literally give herself a lobotomy. Like, there's interesting that's an interesting idea, but because the show is using her as sort of a deus ex machina to like make the plot work, they can't really give you much actual interiority to the character, because then it would betray like her entering at the end to be like, and look, it was all part of the plan. So like, that's part of the problem with these hyper intelligent characters, is if you know what they're actually thinking, they can't be used as like a cheat for the plot to get it to where it needs to be at the end.
Right. I do think, you know, I'm bummed that they introduced a way for her to not be as smart, which is to say she lobotomized herself, and they didn't really use that as a way of actually making that character weak.
No,
with one exception, which when she's like shows up at the meeting. Now, I did like that scene when she's like at the meeting with all the elites, And she has just gotten shot in the head, and so she can't talk.
right.
And that was good
Right.
because
That was good.
basically all these like senators and stuff, they're asking Homelander very basic questions like, how are we going to do this, and how are we going to do? And Homelander's like having a panic attack. And what I like about that scene is, people who are, megalomaniacal fascist dictator types, they're like, they want power, but when you get to the top, when you become, let's say, president of the United States, you realize like, oh, a lot of the job is boring. Like a lot
Even
of the job is like,
fascists need bureaucracy,
right,
and
exactly.
it turns out like that part's pretty boring.
Yeah, and it's like, there's this idea of like, oh, I want the power, but then when you get to the top, it's like you have to answer a bunch of questions like, how do we make sure the sewage runs correctly?
So we
And
want to kill everyone, but like, how?
Yeah,
like
what's the mechanism? What's the process? How do we get these chemicals out there? Like it's so. So I did like the show nodding to that, but the show could have really used the whole like lobotomy thing, probably more to like make her, to basically make any other outcome than it was all in my head all along. So anyway, all the supes are captured at the end of the show. And there is a scene where Frenchie and Kimiko discuss that they do actually like each other, those crazy kids. I mean, the Frenchie and Kimiko stuff this season, not great in my opinion. Like we have already been asked to believe like, oh, these characters, who by the way, in my opinion, have great chemistry.
Yes.
They're not romantically interested. So then Frenchie has this whole thing with Colin. And then now at the end, it's like, and guess what? They are romantically interested. And it's like, okay, like, I was already willing to go along with you about that they're not romantically interested now, like, and for basically reasons. I mean, I guess we have a little bit, I don't know. It just feels really messy. It feels like the characters don't have the experiences necessary to show the change of heart that we see in the show. Does that make sense? In my opinion, like you want to see them going through a bunch of stuff that makes them realize these things, and I don't think what was shown in the show was adequate for that. But but putting aside how unsatisfying their arc was, gotta say it's pretty effective this episode when they're captured. Frenchie has the girl from Gen V like whisper in his ear.
Oh yeah, that was great.
That's cool. And then Kimiko speaks for the first time and screams no, and it's a powerful moment. They've been saving it, and it's a powerful moment. So it's like, okay, even though you kind of didn't love the process to get here, still an effective moment at the end of the day,
Yeah, I can buy them eventually, like feeling like the way they portray it to themselves by the end of the season. Like, I am so emotionally damaged. Like, I can't. I don't deserve love, let alone like yours. Because the idea, like, you have these two characters that seem like, oh, they are being set up to eventually become a couple, but they aren't. They're just like, they're forged in the fires of violence, the job. They have found a partnership, but that partnership doesn't necessarily have to end in romance, is interesting. And then where they leave it at the previous season is like a tension over like, will they or won't they? And even though that's like at the heart of so many character relationships and so many stories, like the fact that the show resisted it for so long, like that's the fun. Like that, the fun is what it makes it interesting is like, oh, maybe they really aren't going to do this. And the moment they introduce Colin, it really feels like the show is saying like, yeah, like they're not going to do this. So ending up where they did still felt like a logical conclusion, or at least a reasonable conclusion for these characters and their emotional arcs. How they got there it felt like we just don't want to do this till the end of the season because we have like exactly how you described, like we want her to speak when this moment hits. So we can't have it happen till the end of the season. So what are these characters like? So much original sin of the like with those characters feels like we know what they're doing at the end. What are they doing until that point?
Right.
And it turns out absolutely nothing.
It just feels really perfunctory when they kiss. Like it's just like,
yeah.
It's just like, oh, we gotta, and now they've realized they love each other. That's kind of how it felt to me.
And then we tear it apart. Whereas like if we had a whole season of them working through what it means
Right.
to care for one another and the
Romantically,
struggles.
right? Yeah.
Right, yes. And like, like that probably wouldn't just be you turn a switch. Like that would be complicated all on its own. And maybe that could be its own set of tensions, and then take them apart and then have her like, you can still get there. I just didn't buy all the Colin stuff. Did absolutely nothing for me,
Yeah.
and him turning himself in, and like then
Yeah.
it just really just felt like they had one idea for these characters this season and nothing else, and that was just really plain as the show went along.
I agree. Okay, let's just run down a few other miscellaneous things. You know, there's a scene where Annie gets her powers back, and she manages to escape. And I have to say, even though whatever the Annie getting her powers or not, whatever, you know, like, don't really care about that arc. Pretty cool when she like takes off at the end.
Yeah, that was good. That was
she,
good.
Like, jumps up to the sky and boom, and it's like, ooh, Annie's back, baby. So I like that. In a mid-credit scene, Homelander is shown that Soldier Boy is still under government control. Like, we knew that from last season, but now like that Homelander is in charge of the government. He's let in on all the Area 51 secrets, and so he now knows. And I assume that character is going to come back next season, right?
Bring back one of the most interesting characters
He's
in the
so
show,
cool.
please and thank you.
Awesome character. Awesome character. The Homelander tries to kill a bunch of people at Vought who know things about the supes that they don't want getting out there, because they're now in charge and they can't have anyone knowing any of their secrets. So there's a list where people start getting slaughtered. Ashley has an assistant. The CEO Ashley has an assistant named Ashley, which I think is one of the best running gags of the show.
Mm-hmm.
And she's killed, unfortunately. Ashley, the OG CEO, Ashley escapes and injects Compound V into her and starts transforming. And we don't know what she transforms into or what power she gets. I assume we'll find out next season. Homelander's apartment, by the way, I guess he just doesn't feel like he needs to have any security in that place, because feels like people are running in and out of there.
No cameras, like just you know, Ring's got his
Let's just
problems,
leave this.
But get some other one, you know.
Let's leave these billion-dollar chemicals just lying around. You know, who cares? And I guess the only other thing to mention is the whole plot line of Huey and his mom and dad. Like, just the mom just never shows up again. Like, there's, you know,
we're never gonna meet her again.
She's at the funeral, and then we're never gonna see her again. So it's like, okay, well, and that kind of sums up the season. It just kind of feels like, oh hey, here's Colin's gonna do a few things, and then he's gone, and you know, Huey's mom's gonna show up for a few episodes, and they're gone. You know, it's like we're having these little like side quests that like aren't really as interesting or compelling as the main quest.
Huey's mom will show up in an emotional montage at the end of next season when only Huey and Annie survive, and he'll embrace her, and that will be the only coda we get to that, a bunch of wasted time in this season with his character.
Okay, well, despite all those things, Patrick, you know, there was some great stuff this season. Love the ice skating, you know, Vought on ice. That was cool. A lot of the corporate commentary I thought was very strong. Like when like Vought showed their movies and it's like the MCU, like, and people are freaking out about it. I really thought that was a nice skewering of Disney and how they announced their slates of films. And there's V'd up sheep just flying around, tearing through people, you know, like
that was good.
The idea that the Butcher cut that guy's leg off, it's such a like messed up thing. We got to see Black Noir and the Deep fight the boys.
When Black Noir at one point flies, he's like, "You can fly?" That was such a good bit.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm just saying there's some nice, you know, I'm just trying to say, like, there's some nice moments this season, and even though it didn't hang together at all, there was enough there. Each episode I knew I was going to see something weird and messed up.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And I appreciate that about the show, that it can consistently deliver that. So any closing thoughts, Patrick Klepek, on season 4 of The Boys?
Yeah, you know, I think some of my whiplash on the season is just I've enjoyed previous seasons of the season so much more. And so my disappointment stems from just holding it to a higher standard. And it just didn't hit that. And so I'm hoping that next season can be a course correction. Having an endpoint in sight it's hard, you know, that's difficult. Like, how do you structure a story that way. There's a reason often shows as they head to the end do the part 1 and part 2, because at least you've conceived of like the entire arc. Here, the season has to exist as an arc and then have another arc. And I just don't think they pulled that part off particularly well. But where they leave things at the end is interesting, is exciting. I don't genuinely know what happens next. Like the basic format of the show has been imploded, and I'm excited to see how these characters inevitably come back together. And how that happens will be something I'll eagerly watch, despite my disappointment with this season.
This is the lowest point that the crew has ever been, right? And supes are now going to control the government. It's like a terrifying concept. And I'm curious to see how they're going to come back. Like, I have no idea how they're going to justify any of this. Like, I have no idea how they're going to justify even keeping the boys alive. Like, why wouldn't Homelander just kill them all immediately? You know, he tried to kill them during the season. So it's like,
right.
What is the purpose of keeping them alive, and how are they all going to be able to reunite and come together again? I have no idea how that's all going to work.
I presume some like there'll be some like, although it'll be, at least 18 months before we see the boys back, we'll get an episode, a season of Gen V
right
before that. And I have to imagine Gen V season 2 will play a pretty integral role in explaining a little bit of the state of the world before we get to that season.
Yeah, I think that's probably accurate. Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.